January 17th, 1942. The Russian winter bites through layers of wool and leather, searing exposed skin with every gust. Somewhere on the frozen outskirts of a shattered village near the Volchov River, the air vibrates with distant artillery, muffled booms swallowed by the snow-covered forests. The ground is churned into mud beneath the weight of armored vehicles, while frost-laden smoke curls from smoldering buildings. A Soviet soldier lies sprawled on the icy earth, his uniform soaked in blood, a jagged wound across his side. His eyes widen in shock, lips trembling as he gasps. The pain, it's unbearable. Nearby, a field medic scrambles over uneven terrain, medical satchel bouncing against his back, breath steaming in the frigid air. Every step carries the threat of incoming fire, yet he moves with practiced urgency. The soldier's screams echo across the battlefield, a raw, human sound swallowed by the chaos of war. The medic drops beside him, hands shaking yet precise, pulling bandages and antiseptics from the kit. In this frozen moment, life and death balance on a knife's edge. The fight to save him is only beginning. By the winter of 1941, the Eastern Front had become a landscape of frozen horror. The Red Army's ranks were filled with young recruits, factory workers, and conscripts hastily trained for combat. Equipment was scarce, and winter clothing often insufficient. Temperatures routinely fell below -30 degrees Celsius, -22 degrees Fahrenheit, turning blood, mud, and sweat into ice. Soldiers marched through snowdrifts taller than themselves, while German panzer divisions carved deep paths into the Soviet rear. Amid this strategic turmoil, entire units faced annihilation. The siege of Leningrad had begun, civilians and troops alike enduring starvation and relentless bombardment. In the field, medics were few, often working with improvised bandages, limited anesthesia, and rudimentary surgical tools. Reports from the front describe medics crawling over frozen terrain, under fire, to reach the wounded. Every hour, every step, was a gamble against frostbite, bullets, and the sheer exhaustion of the human body. Near the Volchov River, where our soldier lies, Soviet forces had been engaged in a series of defensive operations to hold supply lines against the advancing Wehrmacht. These positions were critical, yet precarious, foxholes dug into frozen soil, trenches iced over, and every village a potential death trap. Artillery shells shredded timber and earth, leaving jagged craters that became both refuge and tomb. Within this unforgiving environment, the human element became as important as strategy. Courage, improvisation, and sheer endurance dictated survival. Every wounded soldier represented not just a tactical loss, but a test of resilience for medics risking everything to save lives. The battlefield was merciless, yet within it, acts of compassion flickered, fleeting yet profound, as individuals like our medics stepped into the storm to confront pain, fear, and mortality head-on. Casualties on the Eastern Front mounted with every passing day. By December 1941, Soviet losses numbered in the millions, killed, wounded, or captured, a staggering human toll that underscored the brutality of the conflict. Entire regiments were decimated in single engagements, leaving medics overwhelmed and improvisation a necessity rather than choice. Field hospitals, often mere tents or commandeered barns, were inundated with the injured. Supplies ran thin. Bandages were reused, alcohol for sterilization scarce, and surgical instruments rudimentary. Psychological strain weighed as heavily as physical wounds. Soldiers confronted not only enemy fire but also hunger, frostbite, and the relentless fear of being left behind. Diaries and letters from the period reveal men clinging to small comforts: the warmth of a shared fire, a whispered word from a comrade, or the presence of a medic who would risk their life to staunch a bleeding wound. Each act of care carried profound significance in an environment where survival was uncertain and death could arrive without warning. Alongside the individual suffering, Soviet commanders faced the immense challenge of sustaining morale while coordinating defensive and counteroffensive maneuvers. Logistics faltered in the frozen landscape, ammunition convoys stuck in snow, food shipments delayed, and communications disrupted by artillery barrages. In this context, every soldier saved was a victory, not only for humanity, but for the operational strength of the unit. Near the Volchov River, the soldier's cry pierces the winter silence, yet he is one among countless others caught in the crucible of war. The medic attending him operates against a backdrop of relentless artillery, treacherous ice, and the omnipresent shadow of death. Their struggle embodies both the scale of the Eastern Front and the intimate human stories that unfolded within it. Stories of resilience, fear, and fleeting courage. The battlefield was a vast frozen theater, yet the lens of history sharpens on individual acts. The soldier's agony and the medic's determination illuminate broader truths about the war, how technology, strategy, and human endurance intertwined, and how compassion persisted amid carnage. On the frozen Volchov Front, suffering was immediate and personal. The soldiers' screams cut through the winter air, a raw testament to the fragility of life amidst war. Medics, themselves young and exposed to the same dangers, moved from one injured man to the next under artillery fire. Each bandaged wound, each administered dose of morphine, was a quiet act of courage. Compassion became a weapon, wielded against death itself. The battlefield was a frozen maze of trenches, rivers, and shattered villages. Soviet units relied on natural choke points and defensive lines to slow German advances. Every soldier's survival affected unit cohesion and strategic stability. Medics were integral. Stabilizing a wounded man could mean the difference between holding a line or losing ground. Quick triage and evacuation were not just humanitarian acts, but tactical necessities. Weapons were brutal, and medical tools were scarce. Field kits carried only the essentials: scalpels, bandages, and morphine. Winter amplified every challenge. Instruments froze, blood coagulated instantly, and simple procedures became tests of endurance. Despite these limitations, medics adapted, improvising solutions in the midst of chaos. Every life saved represented skill and ingenuity, triumphing over both human and environmental adversity. In this frozen crucible, the pain of the soldier and the resolve of the medic illuminate the battlefield as more than strategy or firepower. They reveal the intersection of human endurance, tactical necessity, and the fragile technology that separated life from death. On the Eastern Front, command decisions were often as harsh as the winter itself. Officers directed frozen regiments, balancing the need for holding strategic positions with the preservation of human life. A medic's actions could influence these calculations. A wounded soldier stabilized meant the unit retained strength for defense, a critical factor when every man could alter the course of a local engagement. Leaders relied on these small acts of courage to sustain morale and cohesion, recognizing that human lives were both a tactical resource and a moral responsibility. Reports from divisional headquarters frequently praised medics who risked life and limb, understanding that their presence could determine the success or failure of a maneuver. German forces advanced with calculated precision, employing combined arms tactics that blended armor, infantry, and air support. From their vantage, the Soviets' frozen defensive lines were obstacles to be breached with relentless pressure. Yet even the enemy acknowledged the resilience of Soviet troops and the role of medics in prolonging resistance. Documents and post-war accounts describe encounters where officers observed medics working under fire, noting that a single soldier's survival could alter the tempo of engagement. The battlefield, therefore, was not merely a contest of weapons, but a recognition of human will on both sides. In the midst of carnage, acts of compassion were moral statements. The medic kneeling beside the wounded soldier embodied the ethical complexity of warfare, risking one life to save another under extreme danger. Letters and diaries reveal that medics felt the weight of these choices daily, navigating a world where ethical imperatives collided with military necessity. The decision to intervene or to move on to another injured soldier defined their role as both healer and witness to suffering. Each intervention reinforced the notion that even amidst mechanized destruction, humanity persisted. Through leadership, enemy engagement, and moral courage, the frozen battlefield becomes more than a scene of death. It transforms into a stage where strategy, human conscience, and endurance intersect, and where every decision ripples across both lives and outcomes. February 2, 1942. The Volchov Front shivered under a relentless wind, carrying with it the distant thunder of German artillery. The frozen trenches were littered with the debris of battle, splintered wood, discarded rifles, and the frozen bodies of those who had fallen too quickly. The Soviet soldier lay on the icy ground, his breath ragged, pulse faltering. Blood seeped into the snow, crimson spreading like ink on parchment. The medic, Satunin Ivan Petrovich, had been navigating the battlefield for hours. Reports from the divisional field hospital noted his extraordinary resolve, yet even these records could not capture the immediacy of this moment. Shrapnel embedded near the soldier as ribs, frostbite creeping into exposed extremities, artillery shells cracking the air. Each second was a test of skill, courage, and nerve. German forces, advancing in small tactical units, had reached the outskirts of the village. Their presence was felt as tracer rounds whipped across the snow and machine gun fire rattled against frozen timber. The medic worked with precision, applying pressure, extracting shards of metal, and administering morphine, all while his own body trembled from the cold. Around them, fellow soldiers fought desperately to hold the line, shouting orders, returning fire, and dragging wounded comrades to relative cover. A sudden shell exploded nearby, showering earth and ice across the pair. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. The soldier's scream was swallowed by the roar, yet the medic's hands did not falter. Using the faint light of a pale winter sun, he stabilized the wound, tied a makeshift tourniquet, and whispered reassurances, though he could not mask the fear in his eyes. In that frozen tableau, the decisive moment arrived. Survival hung by a thread. The soldier's life depended on a delicate balance of skill, courage, and timing. Outside, the battle raged, indifferent to the human struggle unfolding in a snow-filled crater. Within it, every heartbeat mattered. The immediate danger had passed, but the fight for life and for the unit's survival was far from over. The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows over the frozen village. The soldier, stabilized but still pale and shivering, lay beneath a makeshift shelter of timber and snow. Around him, the battlefield remained a chaotic swirl of motion. Soviet infantry firing sporadically, German squads probing the lines, artillery shells cracking like thunder, Every second carried risk. Every heartbeat was measured against the constant threat of death. Field reports later described moments like this as defining episodes of survival, small victories in a campaign marked by staggering loss. Even Petrovich, the medic, moved with the relentless discipline of someone who understood that hesitation meant death. He administered further morphine, monitored the soldier's breathing, and signaled for reinforcements to carry him back to the rear. Fellow medics responded, dragging stretchers through snow and shell holes, all while the front lines remained fluid, unpredictable, and lethal. The German units, attempting to encircle the Soviet position, were met with stiff resistance. Soviet leadership had learned to anticipate these maneuvers. Defensive fire, strategically placed machine guns, and sniper positions slowed the advance. In these critical hours, the survival of one soldier became emblematic of larger operational resilience. If he had succumbed, it might have meant not just the loss of a life, but the weakening of morale and the disruption of defensive coordination. By evening, the soldier was finally moved to a temporary field hospital, a commandeered barn insulated against the bitter wind. There, under dim lantern light, medics continued their work, cleaning wounds, applying ointments, and preventing infection. Each detail mattered, each procedure a stand against the indifference of war. In the midst of destruction, a fragile order had emerged. The soldier, though battered, lived. The medic had prevailed against the immediate threat, but the broader battle remained unresolved. Outside the barn, the frozen landscape continued to groan under bombardment, the cries of other wounded men echoing faintly through the night. The moment encapsulated the relentless tension of the Eastern Front. Human courage pitted against machine, life balanced precariously on skill and timing. It was a victory, but one thread in a tapestry of struggle, sacrifice, and endurance that stretched across the snowbound battlefield. The frozen night settled over the Volchov Front, leaving a grim silence in the wake of artillery and gunfire. The soldier, now in the relative safety of a field hospital, was one of the fortunate few to survive. Reports from Soviet medical units indicate that casualty rates during these engagements were staggering. Thousands wounded, hundreds dead, and morale stretched to its limits. The survival of even a single soldier had tactical significance. Units depended on every man to maintain defensive lines, relay orders, and continue the fight against an advancing enemy. Field medics like Ivan Petrovich became unsung pillars of resilience. Their actions extended beyond the immediate. They preserved manpower, instilled hope, and maintained a fragile sense of humanity amid systematic destruction. Official records from the Second Shock Army detailed dozens of similar incidents, each reflecting the interplay of skill, courage, and the brutal conditions of winter warfare. The capacity of medics to operate under fire often dictated the survival of units and the continuation of defensive operations. Beyond the immediate human toll, the battle left the landscape scarred. Villages near the front lines were reduced to frozen rubble, rivers clogged with debris, and forests peppered with shell craters. Supply lines had been disrupted, and logistics strained as commanders struggled to evacuate the wounded while simultaneously repelling German offensives. Each act of saving life resonated through the chain of command, reinforcing strategies that valued both human endurance and operational necessity. The soldier's survival was not merely an isolated triumph. It symbolized the broader struggle of Soviet forces, a testament to the determination to hold ground, protect comrades, and persevere despite overwhelming odds. Yet even as the immediate danger passed, the battlefield demanded vigilance. for each day brought renewed assaults, new casualties, and a persistent reminder of the immense cost of war. The fragile victory in the snowbound trenches set the stage for reflection on how resilience, medical skill, and courage intertwined with strategy, shaping both the outcome of engagements and the human stories that defined the Eastern Front. By February 5, 1942, the immediate chaos of battle had subsided, but the echoes of struggle lingered across the Volchov Front. The soldier, stabilized and receiving ongoing care, reflected the broader reality. Survival depended on a delicate balance of skill, timing, and sheer fortune. Field hospitals, though rudimentary, became microcosms of order amid destruction. Medics documented injuries, administered care, and recorded each life saved, creating a thread of humanity within a tapestry of loss. Historical records indicate that the Second Shock Army, which bore the brunt of the Volchov engagements, suffered thousands of casualties in a matter of weeks. Entire units were reduced to skeleton formations, leaving commanders to improvise defenses with limited manpower. Yet the acts of courage by medics like Ivan Petrovich preserved enough strength to prevent total collapse. Contemporary accounts describe how frontline medics, often under direct fire, were instrumental in maintaining unit cohesion, allowing Soviet forces to regroup, counterattack, and slow the German advance. The physical devastation mirrored the psychological toll. Soldiers and civilians alike witnessed unrelenting death and destruction, yet human compassion persisted. Diaries and memoirs from the period recount moments when medics rescued not only comrades but also civilians caught in the crossfire, reinforcing a sense of shared humanity amidst systematic violence. These acts, though small against the scale of the Eastern Front, became symbols of resilience and moral courage. The frozen village, scarred by shell craters and shattered buildings, bore witness to both suffering and survival. The soldier who cried out in agony and the medic who risked everything to save him became more than individuals. They became exemplars of endurance under impossible conditions. Their struggle encapsulated the reality of war, a place where life and death hinged on moments of bravery, the ingenuity of medics, and the unyielding will to persevere. This fragile survival, set against the relentless tide of conflict, naturally leads into reflection on the enduring lessons of human courage, the moral complexities of war, and the historical significance of such acts. The Eastern Front of 1942 was a theater defined by extremes, bitter cold, relentless combat, and staggering loss of life. Yet amid the frozen mud and shattered villages, small acts of courage illuminated the human capacity for endurance and compassion. The soldier who cried out in agony and the medic who risked everything to save him embodied this fragile spark. Their story, though singular, reflects a broader truth. Even in the machinery of war, human life and moral choice remained central. Field medics like Ivan Petrovich operated on the razor's edge between life and death, confronting not only the physical injuries of war, but the ethical weight of their decisions. Every bandaged wound, every administered dose of morphine, was an assertion of humanity against the indifferent forces of destruction. Their work underscores a fundamental principle of warfare, that courage is measured not only in offensive maneuvers or strategic victories, but in the quiet, steadfast acts that preserve life.